Before that, I was a socially awkward recluse with no athletic abilities, quitting my job to focus on writing at home. On odd days, we had pizza and soda, on even days, burgers and fries, and on Sundays, my girlfriend cooked. Someone like me, having a girlfriend? Well, let me tell you, we had been together for 7 years, ever since we met at a bookstore. She was browsing the romance section, and I was looking for horror novels. She smiled at me and said, "You know, life is scary enough without reading these books." I shrugged and said, "You know, life is boring enough without reading these books." That was how we started talking, and eventually dating. She was the optimistic one, always looking for the bright side of things. I was the pessimistic one, always expecting the worst. She was the one who encouraged me to pursue my dream of writing, and I was the one who supported her career as a lawyer. She was the one who made me happy, and I was the one who made her worry. We were opposites, but we complemented each other. Until the zombie apocalypse struck, and everything changed. "Too bad your dreams won't come true," I said to her on the day I quit my job. "Do you even know what my dreams are?" She rolled her eyes at me. "How could I not know? Haven't you always wanted to be a stay-at-home mom? But as for my dream, it's to become a successful writer who lives off his work, and it's about to come true." She compromised with me back then. In a relationship, there's always someone who compromises for the other. Compromise inevitably leads to arguments. To be honest, by the time we reached the day I turned into a zombie, our relationship was already on the brink. The night the zombies appeared, she was working late at the office. At 10 o'clock at night, she called me and asked me to do the laundry, saying she wouldn't be able to come back until dawn. I felt irritated looking at that pile of laundry and shouted, "What kind of company is that? You come home when everyone else does, and then you go back to work? Come back quickly and see what your boss can do to you. I won't believe it. If you don't want to do the laundry, then don't do it. Stop bothering me," she said. After saying that, she hung up, and when I called back, her phone was already switched off. I'm a petty person, and I was furious, ready to go to her office to find her. But as soon as I stepped out of the apartment complex, I was petrified with fear. The crowd was in turmoil under the streetlights, running around like headless chickens. Cars were speeding recklessly, crashing into the crowd without any regard, and the streets were filled with severed limbs and blood. My stomach churned and I spewed out the contents of my dinner: pizza, soda, burgers, and fries. When I bent over, something suddenly bit my neck, causing my limbs to twitch in pain. I reached out with my hand to cover the wound, but the warm blood flowed out as fast as water from a faucet, streaming down to my elbow. When I looked back, the person who bit me had only one eye covered in blood vessels, and the other eye socket was pitch black. His body was covered in wounds, and his blood vessels were swollen and bursting. He hunched over, searching for something. I was furious, and I kicked him, causing him to take 2 steps back. He turned his head, sniffed, and then resumed searching as if he hadn't seen me. Then he seemed to find his target and ran out, joining a group of similar monsters, heading towards the nearby mall. I turned around and ran back to the apartment complex, wanting to find a safe place to call Zoe and hoping her phone was already on. But before I could do that, my phone rang, and she was the one calling. "Where are you? Where are you? Are you okay?" she frantically asked. I tried to respond to her, but all that came out was a hoarse and coarse sound. I suddenly realized that the monster ignored me because I had also become a monster. I had become a zombie. Zoe started crying and shouting, "Where are you? I'm at the police station, and they're arranging for us to leave the city. Where are you? I'm so scared. Hurry and come." I attempted to reply to her, but I immediately heard the terrifying sound I was making. The blood vessels in my hand gradually swelled, and my left hand began to spasm. After a long time, I heard her still crying, so I hung up the phone. Before that, I was a socially awkward recluse with no athletic abilities, quitting my job to focus on writing at home. On odd days, we had pizza and soda, on even days, burgers and fries, and on Sundays, my girlfriend cooked. Someone like me, having a girlfriend? Well, let me tell you, we had been together for 7 years, ever since we met at a bookstore. She was browsing the romance section, and I was looking for horror novels. She smiled at me and said, "You know, life is scary enough without reading these books." I shrugged and said, "You know, life is boring enough without reading these books." That was how we started talking, and eventually dating. She was the optimistic one, always looking for the bright side of things. I was the pessimistic one, always expecting the worst. She was the one who encouraged me to pursue my dream of writing, and I was the one who supported her career as a lawyer. She was the one who made me happy, and I was the one who made her worry. We were opposites, but we complemented each other. Until the zombie apocalypse struck, and everything changed. "Too bad your dreams won't come true," I said to her on the day I quit my job. "Do you even know what my dreams are?" She rolled her eyes at me. "How could I not know? Haven't you always wanted to be a stay-at-home mom? But as for my dream, it's to become a successful writer who lives off his work, and it's about to come true." She compromised with me back then. In a relationship, there's always someone who compromises for the other. Compromise inevitably leads to arguments. To be honest, by the time we reached the day I turned into a zombie, our relationship was already on the brink. The night the zombies appeared, she was working late at the office. At 10 o'clock at night, she called me and asked me to do the laundry, saying she wouldn't be able to come back until dawn. I felt irritated looking at that pile of laundry and shouted, "What kind of company is that? You come home when everyone else does, and then you go back to work? Come back quickly and see what your boss can do to you." "I won't believe it." "If you don't want to do the laundry, then don't do it. Stop bothering me," she said. After saying that, she hung up, and when I called back, her phone was already switched off. I'm a petty person, and I was furious, ready to go to her office to find her. But as soon as I stepped out of the apartment complex, I was petrified with fear. The crowd was in turmoil under the streetlights, running around like headless chickens. Cars were speeding recklessly, crashing into the crowd without any regard, and the streets were filled with severed limbs and blood. My stomach churned and I spewed out the contents of my dinner: pizza, soda, burgers, and fries. When I bent over, something suddenly bit my neck, causing my limbs to twitch in pain. I reached out with my hand to cover the wound, but the warm blood flowed out as fast as water from a faucet, streaming down to my elbow. When I looked back, the person who bit me had only one eye covered in blood vessels, and the other eye socket was pitch black. His body was covered in wounds, and his blood vessels were swollen and bursting. He hunched over, searching for something. I was furious, and I kicked him, causing him to take 2 steps back. He turned his head, sniffed, and then resumed searching as if he hadn't seen me. Then he seemed to find his target and ran out, joining a group of similar monsters, heading towards the nearby mall. I turned around and ran back to the apartment complex, wanting to find a safe place to call Zoe and hoping her phone was already on. But before I could do that, my phone rang, and she was the one calling. "Where are you? Where are you? Are you okay?" she frantically asked. I tried to respond to her, but all that came out was a hoarse and coarse sound. I suddenly realized that the monster ignored me because I had also become a monster. I had become a zombie. Zoe started crying and shouting, "Where are you? I'm at the police station, and they're arranging for us to leave the city. Where are you? I'm so scared. Hurry and come." I attempted to reply to her, but I immediately heard the terrifying sound I was making. The blood vessels in my hand gradually swelled, and my left hand began to spasm. After a long time, I heard her still crying, so I hung up the phone. I know it sounds funny, but in the first few days after the city fell, as a zombie, I walked more than ever. I walked day and night without stopping. If the fitness app was still working, I'm sure I would have beaten those gym rats by a mile. I was different from the other zombies. I still had feelings. I still love Zoe, my girlfriend. I wanted to find her, or at least protect someone who was still alive. But I couldn't find anyone. I searched all the police stations and hospitals, then wandered through the streets and alleys of this city, from downtown to uptown, from east to west, and even walked several miles along the highway before turning back. Everywhere, there were mindless zombies. If Zoe had been infected, I firmly believed I would still be able to recognize her, but I couldn't find her. The city was dead. Wind and rain battered the buildings. The sun rose and set, bright and cold. At that time, I wished I could be like them, like those zombies, to be free from the pain of emotions. The loneliness tortured me when I guarded an empty city alone. When I locked myself in a 970-square-foot apartment to avoid armed humans, the longing lingered. Zoe's figure appeared frequently. When I lay on the bed in the bedroom, she would be in the living room watching TV. When I sat on the couch, she would be changing clothes in the bedroom. Her slippers, toothbrush, towels, all waiting for their owner. Of course, I still loved her, even more than most of the time. She became as lovely as when we first met, with a smile in her eyes. I remembered her shy look when I first saw her in class, her long hair. When she turned and handed a book to a classmate, she noticed that I was staring at her blankly. I remembered what she looked like when she smiled, how she wrinkled her nose like a cat, and then happiness lit up her face. Time makes people weary, and separation takes us back to the past. I also thought, maybe she's in Houston, maybe she's still alive. But even if so, we are on different paths, humans and zombies. I can only curl up in her clothes on the bed, unable to sleep or shed tears. I waited in loneliness for half a month, until the armored vehicle left and the outside returned to silence. They should have gone, after all, there are billions of zombies waiting for them to clean up. I started the generator and resumed watching the movie. As always, I felt bored. I stood up and thought of lying down on the bed for a while, even though I couldn't really sleep, but lying down wouldn't hurt. When I walked to the hallway, I suddenly smelled the scent of a person. I had smelled it just now, but I was distracted by the movie. The scent was too close.
There might be survivors here.
Someone shouted in the hallway. I was scared and didn't know what to do. I froze. You guys follow me. There might be survivors here. I heard the sound of a TV. The sound of the generator was loud, so foolishly, I turned the volume of the TV to the maximum to drown it out. I rushed to the window, and two heavily armed individuals with loaded guns were entering the hallway from the ground floor. I hastily turned off the generator. Then someone outside the door shouted, "Is anyone there? Am I still considered a human?" The apartment building is very old, with 7 floors and 2 units on each floor. I live on the 6th floor, and maybe jumping from the bedroom window wouldn't kill me. That's how zombies do it in movies, but I'm too scared. Search every room and stay safe, the voice said again. A gunshot, and then I heard the security door being kicked open. There's no point hiding anymore. He must have seen the generator and the books I collected from the bookstore neatly stacked against the wall. He must have seen them too. Is anyone there? I dare not move, afraid of making the slightest sound. Is anyone there? We are a search and rescue team for survivors. The footsteps grew closer, and I heard him kick open the door to the guest room. If he sees me, he'll shoot immediately. Maybe I should hide by the door and take a bite at him. No, I have to prove that I'm human. I picked up the pen from the table with my fingers and clumsily wrote 6 words on the paper. I am human. Don't shoot. I opened a crack in the door, extending my hand with the paper held between my fingers. The footsteps stopped. I opened the door a bit more, raising my hands like a criminal, one hand holding the pen and the other holding the paper, sidestepping out. He reflexively raised his gun, aiming at my head. But he didn't shoot. He was young, maybe a high school student, with acne on his forehead and nose, but his gun-handling posture was that of a seasoned soldier. He was both terrified and surprised, with his mouth half open, breathing heavily, his eyes wide open, and a wrinkle formed on his forehead. "You, speak," he commanded, his tone no longer as gentle as before. Helplessly, I shook my head a few times, and he immediately tightened his grip on his gun. I dared not move. I know how terrifying I look. Every time I see myself in the mirror, I want to shoot that monster inside. Suddenly, two fully armed individuals rushed in from outside. I was so scared that I jumped forward, hitting my head on the hallway ceiling. The high school student-looking guy's gun went off, and the bullet pierced my chest. But I had already bitten the neck of one of the intruders. He was strong, and I had no choice but to twist his head with my hands. The other person had already rushed in front of the young man. 3 gunshots, particularly loud in the small room, deafening. His teammate had been infected by other zombies, probably the work of my upstairs or next-door neighbors. The heads of these 2 men, one in my hand and the other on the ground, looked like smashed watermelons. I saved the young man's life, but suddenly he aimed his gun at me again. I quickly threw down the head and raised my hands. He gasped for breath and fired his gun. I thought I was done for, but the bullets were aimed at the zombies that had entered the room behind me, a few emaciated and withered zombies, my neighbors. The young man was venting his frustration with bullets, blasting the heads and bodies of the neighbors into pieces. The young man frantically emptied the magazine. His eyes were red, and he used his hand to wipe away the blood, smearing it all over his face. He was actually crying, and with tears streaming down his face, he no longer looked like a high school student. The accusing gaze he gave me was that of a child. He couldn't help but want to look at the body in camouflage clothing, gradually sobbing. But he quickly regained his composure. "You saved my life," he said coldly, loading the gun with a practiced motion. He picked up the walkie-talkie but aimed the gun at me again. "Attention, I'm Jake. Leo and Ryan sacrificed themselves. We found a survivor in the Greenwood Apartments on North Main Street." He paused, hesitated, and glanced at me. Then he said, "A survivor. I know he won't shoot me right away. But as soon as other humans arrive, my fate won't be pleasant. They'll either kill me immediately or study me to answer the question."
Is this guy human?
Images of shattered corpses and a pitch-black prison cell vie for space in my mind. Compared to that, the past 5 months have been like a fairy tale. The stark contrast excites me, and I gesture repeatedly toward the pen and paper on the floor. The young man understands my intention and kicks them over to me. I crouch down on the ground and urgently start writing.
Let me go, they will kill me.
"I can't let you go." He firmly refuses. In a panic, I pound the ground and write again. "I won't harm anyone, let me go." I take my time to write those few words as neatly as possible. But he remains unmoved, although his grip on the gun loosens slightly. I can't control my restlessness and try to explain to him aloud, my cries of desperation enough to scare myself. But he doesn't shoot, so I risk my life and walk over to start the generator and turn on the TV. I hope he will see me as human, not as a monster. Maybe he will remember that I saved his life, and that I still have feelings. "Stop fussing, I won't let you go. But I won't let them kill you either. You better trust me," he says. I slump onto the couch in despair. Soon enough, his radio crackles to life. "We've arrived at the affordable homes. Please provide the specific location. Unit B4, 6th floor, right side. Stay safe." He responds into the radio. Then he tells me, "Go inside, I'll explain to them." I have no choice but to enter the bedroom. His team members arrive quickly, and I press my ear against the door, straining to hear what they're saying. They deliberately keep their voices low, and with the noise from the generator and TV, I can't make out anything. Suddenly, a few voices become loud and shrill, and it sounds like they're arguing. I decide that if they burst in suddenly, I'll jump from the upper floor. But then they fall silent again, and the echoes of the TV and generator seem like a conspiracy. I retreat to the edge of the bed and lie down, clutching Zoe's clothes, resigning myself to fate. After about 10 minutes, they finally turn off the generator, clearly having reached a decision. "I'm coming in, alone," the young man says outside the door. He pushes it open, steps inside, and closes it behind him. This time, he has the gun slung over his shoulder and offers me paper and a pen. "I trust you," he says, clearly rehearsed. "I hope you can come with us to Houston. You probably don't understand the situation right now. Just last month, we barely held on to Houston. We have just over 100,000 people left, and we lost 2 more just now. We're likely the last humans on this continent." He pauses for a moment, staring directly into my eyes, as if confirming that I understand him. I nod, but in my mind, I contemplate attacking him now. He would undoubtedly die, but how many people are outside? On the other hand, there are over 6 billion zombies on Earth. The excessively hungry ones aren't a significant threat, but their sheer numbers make it easy to get infected. Newly infected zombies have strong mobility and are very dangerous. Humanity could perish at any moment. If you're immune to the zombie virus and haven't lost your mind, maybe we can find key information about developing a vaccine from your body. When the last sentence stumbled out of his mouth, I sneered inwardly. It seemed like he was taking me for a fool. "You just saved my life, maybe you can save others too." This time, I remained unmoved. I've never had a sense of collective spirit. "I don't even know your name." "I'm Jake." He tried to make his tone friendlier, getting closer to me. Thinking back to how he cried earlier, I realized he was still too young. But guns don't discriminate based on age, so I reluctantly wrote down my own name, Evan. "I'll protect you. You saved my life. But they won't give you any other choice. If you try to run, they'll kill you." His tone shifted abruptly, turning ice cold. "And there are 163,108 survivors counting on you." 163,108? I wrote down the number and added a big question mark, curious why he remembered it so clearly. "We have records. That's the data from when we left Houston." Suddenly, hope sprouted in my heart. Maybe Zoe was among them? Zoe Morgan, 163,108. Is she there? That's Zoe's name. Are you asking if such a person exists? We can only find out when we return to Houston. Who is she to you? I picked up one of Zoe's clothes and waved it in front of him. "Trust me, if she's in Houston, I'll make sure you see her." If I said that was the reason I agreed to go to Houston, it would undoubtedly be a lie to cover up my own infatuation. In reality, I only had 2 choices, either go or die. But carrying a glimmer of hope is always better than descending further into despair from the depths of despair. I agreed to all of Jake's demands right away. Actually, they weren't his demands, but those of his teammates, some of whom eyed me with suspicion while others seemed fearful. My hands were bound behind my back, and my mouth was taped shut. I didn't feel much pain, but I worried that tearing off the tape would remove a layer of skin. Then again, what difference would it make? How much uglier could I get? "I'm sorry about this," Jake said. I began to admire the courage and honesty of this young man in front of me, even though his earlier crying was quite uncharacteristic. It started raining outside. I was escorted onto an armored vehicle. Apart from Jake, everyone else kept their distance from me. There were 5 of them left, none of whom looked like soldiers, and they were all quite young, resembling more like outlaws. It had been so long since I last saw living people, and they looked really clean. As I observed them carefully, I noticed a pair of eyes glaring at me fiercely. The car's interior lights cast a dazzling halo. The vehicle had already started moving. It would take over 9 hours to travel from this city to Houston. At that moment, I thought we would spend the entire journey in silence. However, not long after the car started, the owner of those intense eyes spoke up. He stood up and said, "This is too dangerous. We need to tie him up." I glared at him angrily. He had slender limbs and a disproportionately large head, with cheekbones that seemed like right angles. "We discussed this earlier. Just try moving him. Jake shouted. But Cole persisted. At least tie his mouth shut. After he finished speaking, another person pulled him back down to his seat. Speaking of this, he became excited and raised his voice. The car was driving smoothly, and I couldn't help but close my eyes, hoping to find some peace. Several hours later, Cole became restless again. He stood up and spoke to the driver through the intercom, saying, "It's about time to slow down." Everyone except Jake looked at Cole as if he were a comedian, exchanging knowing glances and laughing silently. We were still far from Houston, so what was he planning to do? He started singing a song, a lively ballad about fighting zombies. He smiled at me while singing, opened the back door, and the sight outside startled me. A large group of zombies were running behind the car like refugees, lined up in a straight line, resembling the wake of a ship. At that moment, the car gradually decelerated. Cole grabbed a can of gasoline from under his seat and started pouring it toward the back of the car. He continued until the car came to a slow stop. He lit a cigarette and threw it out, instantly igniting a massive fire that leaped towards the distance, engulfing the zombies that had been following us. They struggled and writhed in the flames, turning into swaying black shadows. As I looked out, it felt like I was gazing into hell. But everyone in the car burst into laughter, filled with joy. Unbeknownst to me, Cole suddenly swung his hand and threw the gasoline canister at me. Then he pulled out a small knife and charged towards me. I immediately jumped up but ended up hitting the car ceiling, losing my balance and falling down. He was already on top of me, and the knife had already pierced my neck. However, Jake had grabbed his hand. Filled with anger, I struggled to break free from his grip, trying to open my mouth as wide as possible. "That's enough," Jake said as he pulled out a gun and pressed it against Cole's temple. Cole laughed, spread his hands, and left the knife in my neck. He said, "Just kidding, just kidding." He called it a joke, but I saw an undying hatred in his eyes. At that moment, I didn't understand it, but later I realized that he hated the zombies. What good was it to hate the zombies? Zombies couldn't feel pain or fear, they wouldn't surrender or beg for mercy. But I could do all of those things. Unfortunately, I was also a zombie. He no longer saw me as a human. "You will be publicly hanged, and we will tear you apart, piece by piece," he threatened. Cole pushed away the people pulling him and stood up, spitting on the ground with a vicious look. Jake didn't say a word. He pulled me out of the car and walked to the front, switching places with the young man who had been driving and making me sit in the passenger seat. "I'm sorry about your neck," he said as he unlocked the handcuffs and tore off the tape from my mouth. If I was willing to be a zombie, I would have torn Cole apart. But this young man beside me made me feel like a human again. The car started again, and as I looked up through the window, I saw familiar towering mountains, gradually fading behind the setting sun. The sky had turned blood red, and the scenery was truly beautiful. If I could still speak, if Zoe were still by my side, I would definitely tell her how beautiful the scenery here is. And she would call me a fool and tell me to think about how to survive. Even though I knew there was no meaning in admiring the beauty of the scenery, that's precisely the meaning of being human, isn't it? I pulled the knife out of my neck and poked the wound, accidentally sinking my finger in. I pulled it out and wrapped it with a piece of cloth. Suddenly, I felt ridiculous, as if I were about to burst into laughter. When the armored vehicle drove into Houston, it was already dawn the next day. In the hazy morning light, the air was filled with mist between the rain lines, and a thick fog covered the distant skyscrapers, making me feel gloomy and restless. Looking back on my life, fate has been indifferent to me, and I have surrendered myself to fate. The smell of alcohol from my foster father still lingers in my life. How many years has it been since I last saw him? He has turned into a zombie, so he probably can't drink anymore. Before meeting Zoe, I thought I was a complete scoundrel. She peeled away my facade, and oh, it turns out I'm still just a child. Yes, I often dream of her holding my hand as we walk through the cold night, my little hand tightly gripping her thumb. If I could see her again, even if I get sliced, so be it. The armored vehicle stopped between two buildings, and the disturbing scene outside the window interrupted my thoughts. A wall of charred corpses piled up, densely packed black heads and bodies intertwined. A person holding a gun emerged from the shadows of the building. Jake told me to get down and nodded at him, taking out a letter from his pocket and handing it to him. It was a letter he wrote in my room before he left. "Give this to Max and tell him we're waiting here for instructions." Jake told me that this Max is the leader here. Only after receiving the instructions did the armored vehicle continue forward, passing through an iron gate. This wasn't the final checkpoint. Every few kilometers, we passed through another wall of corpses. The last stronghold of humanity is nothing short of a city of charred bodies. On the third day of the zombie outbreak, the city I was in had already been destroyed. My days have been too easy, but what kind of nightmares have the people in this city experienced? I tried to imagine the fierce battles they had endured in the past 6 months. How many people stayed awake through the long nights, their nerves strained amidst the screams of the zombies, clinging to survival in fear and longing. We stopped on the river, and on the other side of the bridge lies the last spark of humanity. There were already people waiting on the bridge, a neatly dressed middle-aged man standing in the center with about 10 armed adults behind him. From their physique, it was clear that they were different from Jake's group, more like regular soldiers. Jake got out of the car first and reported to the man, he should be Max. Jake came back and brought me down from the car. "I promise your safety," he said. What else could I do? I got out of the car and saw many corpses stranded by the riverbank. Perhaps I would soon be like them. With a swish, the guns of those people were raised, 6 or 7 meters away, pointed at the two of us. Jake stood in front of me. "What the hell?" "Put down your guns," Max commanded. I was surprised because he seemed like a friendly person, not like the charismatic leaders in movies, but more like a typical corporate executive. "Can you speak?" he asked, smiling, as if making a visit. I shook my head, and the faces of the people behind him became even more tense, holding their breath. In this tense atmosphere, only he could still smile. "He can write," Jake said quickly. I nodded eagerly, hoping to communicate with him. "Good. Very good." Max nodded with satisfaction and said, "You are important to us, don't be afraid, we won't harm you. As long as you cooperate well with our work, we will protect you. Also, we have arranged people to investigate the woman you're looking for. Although the hope is not great, we still need to have confidence, don't you think so?" I nodded vigorously, feeling lucky. "That's good. I hope you can cooperate well with our work." He raised his hand, swept it around and said, "What are you waiting for? Get in the car and go into the city." They took me to the other side and I looked out the window. There were armed patrols on the road continuously. Many people, who looked only 13 or 14 years old, or even close to the grave, were holding guns and walking in the same queue. A slogan appeared behind the patrol team. "Once infected, not human. Please shoot in the head immediately." They secretly took me into a closed room in a high-rise building, with no windows and only a dim light. I felt like a prisoner being interrogated, not knowing what they were going to do to me. Jake was asked to stay outside the door. I lay on the table overnight. They didn't give me a bed or food, as if they believed I didn't need those things. I could only listen to the humming of the ventilation fan, passing the long 10 hours. The next day at noon, Max came again, accompanied by Jake and his guards. He always had a smiling and friendly face.
"Good news. We checked the list and indeed there is someone named Zoe Morgan. She arrived here 2 months ago. It hasn't been easy for this girl all the way. But what happened to him?"
This couldn't be true. My face couldn't help but twitch, wanting to laugh and cry, but I couldn't shed tears. I trembled with discomfort. "What's wrong with you?" Jake asked me. What else could be wrong? I was happy. Those slippers, towels, and toothbrush must be so thrilled to hear this news, they must be crying even harder. But what is it? I exerted all my strength to hold back the twitching of my lips, wanting to know what he was going to say next. But, you can't see her for now. First, you have to undergo an examination. Perhaps, we can cure your illness. After all, we have to ensure her safety. Second, you have surely considered this yourself. In your current state, she would find it difficult to accept. We need to work on her thoughts. What do you think? Max's words sounded official, making my heart skip a beat, and I felt hopeless. In my current state, how could I continue to be with her? I squeezed the pen and scribbled on the paper, "I'll do as you say, please help me." Good. Very good. Starting today, you will undergo examination. I'm glad you can cooperate with our work. A new paragraph began, and the tough days started. They installed various monitoring devices on me. They cut my skin, muscles, and bones, and drew my blood. They scanned my brain and scanned my bones. Then they injected me with all sorts of vaccines and strange medications. These days seemed endless. I had to have my blood drawn twice a day and skin, muscle, and bone samples extracted once a week. And every time I asked Commander Max to see Zoe, he brushed me off with a few words, and after that, he hardly appeared anymore. In the blink of an eye, 2 months passed quickly. I wrote a note to Jake asking, did he lie to me? Is Zoe not alive? She's alive. Jake told me sincerely. I checked the list myself, and she's indeed on it. But your experiment is not looking optimistic. They did conclude from the experimental data of a few samples that the rational thinking ability of zombies is related to their emotional state at the time of infection, but that's just data. No one else is as clear-headed as you are. And what they're more concerned about is whether someone will exploit this phenomenon to create more people like you. They have 2 plans. First, fortify the city and exterminate the zombies as soon as possible. It's possible for them to learn to eat normally. The second plan is to develop a vaccine. A vaccine is necessary, but rebuilding the entire medical system may take several years, even a decade. You need to be patient. I think they will let her come to see you. If there's no progress next month, I'll help you. Jake didn't lie to me. Sure enough, 1 week later, they informed me that I could see Zoe the next day. The night of waiting for the meeting was particularly long. I remembered back in school, there was a sleepless night just like this, the night before I asked her out for the first time. What should I say to her? Tell her how much I love her? Ask for her forgiveness for my shortcomings over the years? Tell her not to wait for me to seek new happiness? Right, I must say, I shouldn't have bothered you on the phone. We were finally arranged to meet in a dimly lit interrogation room. A barbed wire fence divided the space, keeping us apart. I didn't know who had set up this cruel meeting. I tried to sit up straight and wrap my body tightly with clothes. I waited for a long time before she came in from the door on the other side of the barbed wire. Is this Zoe? I could hardly recognize her, she had become so thin, with sunken cheeks. I still remember how she would mumble about wanting to get rid of her belly fat. She would complain almost every day. Her hair was messy, and her face wasn't clean. Didn't she spend an hour every morning getting herself ready? She would say her skin had gotten worse today. Could you buy me some good skincare products? She had a handgun around her waist, a real one. Did she use it to kill cockroaches? How afraid of cockroaches was she? She looked like she was in her 30s. But wasn't I worse off? What did all of this matter? I finally saw her, the one I had been thinking about day and night. She stared at me, her eyes red, and I could tell she was excited. I couldn't wait for her to speak first, so I started writing on the paper. I miss you. She still stared at me, but suddenly a hint of madness appeared in her eyes. I had never seen such a complex expression before. She must be scared, or something else. I could tell that she was trying hard to hold back tears. You think of me? Where were you when I needed you? She yelled hysterically, unable to hold back her sorrow any longer. She pressed the back of her hand against her nose. I looked for you. I replied. She stared at those words for a long time. I felt her gradually calming down, sensing her becoming like a weapon forged slowly. After she stopped crying, she pounded the table hard and shouted at the surveillance monitor in the corner. "You shouldn't have brought him here," she said.
"To the hundreds of thousands of people here, he's a threat."
Fear was mixed with her tears. What has she been through? How many zombies has she killed? Has she also built walls with corpses? She turned back to me and shouted.
"Why didn't you die? Why did you show up here?"
I could hear how wrong she felt.
"No, you're not human. I don't know you. You're not Evan."
With those final words, she stormed out of the room. Max stepped in and stopped her. "You didn't ask him any of the questions I told you to. What if he turned into this because of experiments? What if he has allies? You should follow my orders. If you disobey my orders, I can execute you." He spoke softly, but he was too urgent, and I heard every word. Zoe pushed him aside and ran out. I couldn't let her leave like that. I rushed out as well, slamming the door open. Outside, there was a crowd of people, Max's guards, and Jake's team members, all pointing guns at me. I lost control, like a wild beast. "Stop him! Don't hurt him!" Jake shouted. "Don't kill him!" Max commanded. Zoe didn't look back, she just kept running forward. I chased after her, dodging bullets and bodies. Then someone behind us yelled, "They've turned into zombies, shoot them." I looked back, and 2 soldiers had already turned into zombies. I just scratched them with my fingers, and they got infected. They jumped up as well. Soon, they infected another person. I had to help them. I jumped over and tightly embraced one of the zombies. Bullets made 2 holes in its head. I let go of the corpse, and at that moment, a bunch of gun muzzles were aimed at me. I saw Zoe's silhouette not far away between the guns. She stood at the entrance of the light, also pointing a gun at me. Seeing that I was subdued, she slowly lowered her gun and turned away. She disappeared into the light at the end of the corridor. "Tie him up and watch his hands." I listened to the commanding order and felt like I had fallen into an endless abyss. It would be better to be dead. Cole escorted me into a pitch-black room.
"I told you. We're going to slice you into pieces."
He kicked and punched me in the face, and I could feel my nasal bone exposed. Before leaving, he took out a gun and shot a few bullets into my body. All illusions have shattered. The past was nothing but a bubble. They were no longer human, or perhaps, they were the most real humans, stripping away the fancy clothes. Aren't humans just animals? And yet, here I am still longing for stories and love. Still hoping to become human again. I'm such a fool. I spent a long time in the darkness, so long that I forgot my own existence. Sometimes, I would regain consciousness. Breathing slowly, struggling to fall asleep. I wished I could fall asleep, and upon waking up, be surprised to find out it was all just a dream. But my eyes remained closed, with no dreams. "Get up." I opened my eyes, and saw Jake standing over me. "I'll take you away. There's a commotion outside. Your girlfriend has told other survivors about you, and they're demanding your execution. It's happening up ahead. Sorry, I'll get you out of the city." He pulled me up before I could say anything. "Hurry up, I'll get you out of here. They're all ahead, nobody will notice. You saved my life, now I'll return the favor. And take these research materials with you. Maybe you'll find more rational survivors. We will put an end to this nightmare." He stuffed a stack of documents into my pocket. I followed him out of the room, and angry voices erupted outside the building. They were furious, clamoring to kill me. It was Zoe who brought them here. I never would have thought. Actually, I should have known. I recalled our arguments after resigning, but I seemed to have deliberately avoided those memories. The last remaining kindness in this world came from this young man beside me. Jake shot and broke the lock of the iron door, pushed it open, and the sunlight was blinding. With a reassuring smile, he said, "Let's go to that car. Trust me, this world will surely get back on track. I'll come find you then. Understand?" He pulled me closer and grabbed my shoulder, looking into my eyes, and I could tell he was saying it to himself. I tried to believe him. Suddenly, a gunshot interrupted me. Blood. Fresh red blood. Blood and gunshots. Jake's blood splattered on my chest, and the bullet passed through him and hit me. He fell onto me, and the gun kept firing. A young man pointed the gun with a cold expression. He emptied the chambers of his revolver, then started reloading. I dragged Jake back into the house, and blood was oozing from several holes in his body. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He lifted his hand with difficulty, but dropped it, losing consciousness. I couldn't let him die like this. Well, let everything go to hell. Without hesitation, I grabbed his hand and bit into it. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. He took a deep breath and sat up straight. I hoped he would recognize me, so I locked my eyes onto his. Look at me, recognize me. However, a divine power rejected me. He didn't look at me, swiftly turned his head, and charged towards that young man. I didn't stop him. It seems we're all heading to hell together. The protesting crowd didn't notice the danger behind them. They were rapidly infected, like a dry beach engulfed by the tide. I climbed a tall building and watched the scene outside. The protesting crowd became agitated and quickly succumbed to the infection. I caught a glimpse of Zoe from afar and shouted her name, but at that moment, someone bit her. She started chasing after people, and by the time I reached the ground floor, I couldn't find her anymore. 3 days later, Houston fell. The remaining tens of thousands of people in this small city were all infected. Another 3 days passed, and I finally found Zoe. She was infected too. Her eyes were empty, just like the other zombies, seemingly gazing at the sky. The sky opened up and a gentle rain began to fall. 7 years ago, when we were still in college, the rain fell from the sky. She asked me then, "Why do you like me?" "Just because I do. Why do there have to be so many reasons?" "But what if I change one day? Will you still love me?" "Of course. No matter how you change, I'll still love you." "And you?" "Me too." Thinking about these memories, I couldn't help but hold her tightly in my arms, feeling a faint warmth.